The morning sun painted the sky with soft orange colors as Samuel Washington opened his front door and stepped onto his small porch. At 90 years old, Samuel moved slowly, but with purpose. His dark skin showed the lines of many years lived, and his gray hair was combed neatly under his old baseball cap. He wore his favorite brown jacket, the one with his Purple Heart medal pinned proudly on the chest. This medal meant everything to Samuel because he had earned it fighting for his country in Vietnam many years ago. Samuel looked at his watch. It was exactly 8 o'clock in the morning, just like every Tuesday for the past 10 years. He had a routine that he followed without fail. Every Tuesday morning, he would walk 3 blocks down Maple Street to Miller's grocery store to buy his food for the week. The store owner, Mrs. Miller, always saved the best apples for Samuel and gave him a small discount because she respected what he had done for America. The old veteran picked up his wooden walking stick from beside the door. This stick had been with him for 15 years, ever since his legs started getting weak. It was carved from oak wood and had become smooth from years of use. Samuel gripped it firmly in his right hand and began his slow walk down the street. Each step was careful and measured. He did not want to fall and hurt himself. As Samuel walked, he noticed how beautiful his neighborhood looked in the morning. Light. The houses were small but well kept, with tiny gardens full of flowers. Mrs. Johnson was watering her roses next door and waved at Samuel with a big smile. She called out, "Good morning, Mr. Washington. Beautiful day, isn't it?" Samuel tipped his cap and replied, "Yes, indeed, Mrs. Johnson. God has blessed us with another fine morning." Down the street, Samuel could see children getting ready for school. They were laughing and playing as they walked with their backpacks. Some of them knew Samuel and would always say hello to him. He loved seeing the young faces full of hope and dreams. It reminded him of why he had fought in the war so long ago, to protect the future for these children. Samuel remembered his own childhood in this same neighborhood. Back then, things were much harder for people who looked like him. There were places he could not go and things he could not do because of the color of his skin. But Samuel never let that stop him from serving his country when the war came. He believed that America was worth fighting for, even when America did not always treat him fairly. The war had been terrible. Samuel had seen things that still gave him bad dreams sometimes. He had lost many good friends in the jungle, but he had also saved lives and helped other soldiers make it home to their families. The Purple Heart on his jacket was not just a piece of metal. It was proof that he had bled for his country and survived to tell about it. After the war, Samuel had come home and worked hard for 40 years in a factory. He married his sweetheart, Mary, and they had 3 children together. Mary had died 5 years ago, and his children now lived in other cities with their own families. They called him every week and visited when they could, but most days Samuel was alone. The Tuesday morning walks to the grocery store were one of the highlights of his week. As Samuel walked down Maple Street, he passed the old barber shop where he had been getting his hair cut for 30 years. The barber, Mr. Tony, was just opening, up for the day. "Morning, Samuel," Tony called out. "See you Saturday for your usual trim?" Samuel nodded and smiled. These small conversations with neighbors made him feel connected to his community. The street was getting busier now as people headed to work. Cars drove by slowly, and most of the drivers knew Samuel and would wave or honk their horns in greeting. Samuel felt safe and respected in his neighborhood. Everyone knew his story and treated him with kindness. What Samuel did not know was that 3 young men were watching him from across the street. These men were not from the neighborhood. They had been causing trouble in the area for several months, but nobody had been brave enough to stand up to them. The 3 men were in their 20s, much younger and stronger than most people around here. They spent their days looking for easy targets to bother and hurt. The leader of the group was a tall man with many tattoos covering his arms. His name was Derek, and he had a mean look in his eyes. The second man was shorter but very muscular, and he liked to start fights. The third man just followed the other 2 and did whatever they told him to do. All 3 of them had been in trouble with the police before. Derek pointed at Samuel and whispered something to his friends. They all started laughing in a cruel way. They had been watching Samuel for several weeks, learning his routine. They knew he walked alone every Tuesday morning at the same time. They knew he was old and could not move fast. To them, Samuel looked like an easy target for their twisted games. Samuel continued walking slowly toward the grocery store, completely unaware of the danger following him. He was thinking about what food he needed to buy and looking forward to his friendly chat with Mrs. Miller. The morning sun felt warm on his face, and he was grateful for another day of life. He had no idea that his peaceful morning was about to be destroyed by 3 cowards who had no respect for what he had sacrificed for their freedom. The intersection ahead was busy with morning traffic. Samuel would need to cross the street carefully to reach the grocery store. He always took his time at crosswalks because the cars moved fast and he could not get out of the way quickly if something went wrong. As he approached the corner, the 3 bullies began to move closer, like hunters stalking their prey. Samuel stopped at the crosswalk and waited for the light to change, just as he had done hundreds of times before. He had no idea that in just a few minutes his quiet life would be changed forever by an act of cruelty that would shock everyone who witnessed it. The traffic light turned green, and Samuel Washington began to cross the busy street slowly. His wooden walking stick tapped against the pavement with each careful step. The morning rush hour was in full swing, with cars, trucks, and buses moving in both directions. Samuel always took his time at intersections because he knew that one wrong step could be very dangerous for someone his age. Halfway across the crosswalk, Samuel heard footsteps behind him. He thought it might be other people trying to cross the street, so he moved a little to the side to give them room. But the footsteps got closer and closer, and then suddenly, 3 young men appeared around him like a pack of wolves surrounding their victim. Derek, the tall man with tattoos, stepped directly in front of Samuel, blocking his path. The old veteran looked up at the young man with confusion and worry. "Excuse me, son," Samuel said politely. "I'm just trying to get to the store." His voice was calm and respectful, the same way he had learned to speak during his years in the military. But Derek did not move out of the way. Instead, he smiled, in a mean way that made Samuel's stomach feel sick. "Well, well, well," Derek said loudly so everyone around could hear. "Look what we have here, boys. An old man thinks he's some kind of hero." Derek pointed at the Purple Heart medal on Samuel's jacket and laughed in a cruel way. The second bully, the short, muscular one named Rick, moved to Samuel's left side. "Yeah, Derek, look at that shiny medal. Bet he thinks he's better than us because he's got some old piece of metal." Rick's voice was full of hate and anger. The third bully, a skinny man called Joe, stood on Samuel's right side, completing the way trap around the elderly veteran. Samuel felt his heart start beating faster. He had been in dangerous situations before during the war, but this was different. He was 90 years old now, not a young soldier. His body was weak, and he could not fight like he used to. "Please, young men," Samuel said, trying to stay calm. "I don't want any trouble. I just want to buy my groceries and go home." Derek laughed even louder. "Trouble? Old man, you are the trouble. Walking around here like you own the place, wearing that medal like you're special." Derek's voice got meaner with each word. "What did you even do to get that medal? Probably just hid in a hole somewhere while real men did the fighting." Samuel felt hurt by these words, but he tried not to show it. He had earned his Purple Heart by saving 3 wounded soldiers under enemy fire. He had been shot in the leg and arm during the rescue, but he had gotten his fellow soldiers to safety. That medal represented the blood he had shed and the friends he had lost. But Samuel did not want to argue with these bullies. He just wanted to get away from them. "I don't want to fight you boys," Samuel said quietly. "I'm just an old man trying to live peacefully." He tried to step around Derek, but the young man moved to block him again. Cars were driving by, and some drivers were starting to notice what was happening, but nobody stopped to help. Rick moved closer to Samuel and started saying terrible things about the color of Samuel's skin. He used words that Samuel had heard many times during his life, especially when he was young. These words were meant to make Samuel feel small and worthless. They were the same words that people had used to try to keep him from serving in the military and from living in nice neighborhoods. Samuel's hand started to shake, but not from fear. He was angry that these young men would use such hateful language. He had fought for their freedom, and this was how they treated him. "That language is not necessary," Samuel said firmly. I fought for this country so that people like you could live free. Joe, the skinny bully, laughed and made jokes about Samuel's age. Look how old and weak he is, Joe said. Bet he can't even remember where he put his teeth this morning. All three bullies thought this was very funny and started laughing at Samuel's expense. The traffic light had turned red again, and Samuel was stuck in the middle of the crosswalk with these three cruel young men. Cars were waiting for the light to change, and people were watching from the sidewalks. But nobody came to help the elderly veteran who was clearly in trouble. Derek reached out and poked Samuel's Purple Heart medal with his finger. This thing probably came from a toy store, Derek said with a nasty grin. Bet you bought it yourself to make people think you're tough. This was too much for Samuel to bear. That medal represented everything he had sacrificed for his country. Don't touch that, Samuel said, his voice getting stronger. That medal represents the blood of good men who died for your freedom. But Derek just laughed and poked the medal again, harder this time. Rick suddenly grabbed Samuel's wooden walking stick and yanked it away from the old man's grip. Samuel immediately lost his balance and stumbled to the side. Hey! Samuel called out, reaching for his stick. I need that to walk. But Rick held the stick high above his head, just out of Samuel's reach. You want your stick, old man? Rick taunted. Go get it. Without warning, Rick threw Samuel's precious walking stick directly into the busy street. The stick landed in the middle of the road just as cars were starting to move through the intersection. Samuel watched in horror as his walking stick, his constant companion for 15 years, was crushed under the wheels of a passing truck. The stick that had helped him walk safely for so many years was now broken into pieces and scattered across the asphalt. Without his walking stick, Samuel felt completely helpless. His legs were not strong enough to support him without help, and now he was trapped between three bullies who seemed to enjoy his suffering. The old veteran looked around desperately for someone to help him, but everyone seemed too busy or too scared to get involved. That was when Joe, the skinny bully, decided to make things even worse. While Samuel was looking at the remains of his walking stick in the street, Joe moved behind the elderly veteran and placed both hands on Samuel's back. Maybe you should go get your stick, old man, Joe said with evil in his voice. Before Samuel could react or defend himself, Joe pushed him hard from behind with all his strength. Samuel, already unsteady without his walking stick, stumbled forward helplessly. His old legs could not catch his balance, and he fell directly into the busy street just as the traffic light turned green and cars began to move. Samuel Washington hit the cold pavement hard. His 90-year-old body landed with a painful thud in the middle of the busy street. Cars honked their horns loudly as drivers slammed on their brakes to avoid hitting the fallen veteran. The sound of screeching tires filled the air like screams of panic. Samuel lay on his side, his Purple Heart medal now dirty and scratched from the fall. Pain shot through Samuel's hip and shoulder where he had hit the ground. His brown jacket was torn, and his baseball cap had fallen off, showing his gray hair. Small stones from the road were stuck to his face, and he could taste blood in his mouth. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the hurt in his heart. He could not believe that people would be so cruel to an old man who had served his country. The three bullies stood on the sidewalk laughing like they had just watched the funniest movie ever made. Derek pointed at Samuel lying in the street and slapped his knee with joy. Did you see how he fell? Derek shouted to his friends. Like a tree falling down in the forest, Rick and Joe were laughing so hard they could barely breathe. Several people rushed into the street to help Samuel. A young woman in a nurse uniform knelt beside him and checked if he was hurt badly. Are you okay, sir? She asked with worry in her voice. Can you move your legs? Samuel nodded slowly, but he felt dizzy and confused. An older man helped Samuel sit up carefully while another person called for an ambulance on their phone. But what the three bullies did not know was that their cruel attack had been watched by some very special people. Just 50 feet away, sitting in a black SUV at the red traffic light, were four men who had seen everything that happened. These were not ordinary men. They were active-duty Navy SEALs returning to their base after finishing a training exercise at dawn. Commander Jake Mitchell sat in the driver's seat of the SUV. He was 35 years old, with short brown hair and serious eyes that had seen action in many dangerous places around the world. Next to him sat Lieutenant Tom Rodriguez, a weapons expert who could hit any target from incredible distances. In the back seat were Petty Officer First Class Mike Chen, a demolitions specialist, and Petty Officer Second Class David Williams, a communications expert. All 4 SEALs were dressed in their military uniforms, and their vehicle was filled with training equipment. They had been up since 4 in the morning practicing rescue operations and combat techniques. These men were among America's most elite warriors, trained to handle the most dangerous missions in the world. Commander Mitchell had been watching the traffic light when he noticed the 3 young men surrounding the elderly veteran in the crosswalk. His military training had taught him to always be aware of his surroundings and to watch for trouble. When he saw the bullies blocking Samuel's path, Mitchell knew something bad was about to happen. "Are you guys seeing this?" Mitchell said quietly, to his team pointing toward the crosswalk. The other 3 SEALs immediately looked in that direction and saw what was happening to Samuel. Lieutenant Rodriguez leaned forward in his seat. "Those punks are hassling that old man," he said with anger in his voice. Rodriguez had grown up with his grandfather, who was also a war veteran, and he could not stand to see elderly people being mistreated. When the bullies grabbed Samuel's walking stick, all 4 SEALs felt their anger rising. Petty Officer Chen clenched his fists. "They just took his cane," Chen said. "That old man needs that to walk safely." These warriors had been trained to protect innocent people, and everything they were seeing went against their values. But when Rick threw Samuel's walking stick into the street and it was crushed by the truck, the SEALs knew they had to act. "That's enough," Commander Mitchell said firmly. "Nobody deserves to be treated like that, especially not an elderly veteran." Then Joe pushed Samuel from behind, and the 90-year-old man fell into the busy street. All 4 SEALs saw the purple heart medal on Samuel's jacket as he hit the ground. This was not just any elderly man being attacked. This was a fellow service member, a brother in arms who had fought for his country and earned the respect that comes with military service. "Did you see that medal?" Petty Officer Williams asked with shock in his voice. "That's a Purple Heart. That man bled for this country." Williams himself had been wounded in combat 2 years earlier and knew what it meant to earn such an honor. "Commander," Mitchell was already reaching for his phone. "That does it," he said with controlled anger. "Nobody attacks one of our own." Military personnel have a special bond with each other that civilians often do not understand. It does not matter what war they fought in or what branch of service they belong to. When one service member is in trouble, others come to help. The traffic light turned green, but Mitchell did not drive forward. Instead, he pulled the SUV to the side of the road and parked it quickly. "Tom, call the base and tell them we have a situation here," Mitchell ordered. "Mike, get the medical kit. David, start recording everything with your phone in case we need evidence later." All 4 SEALs moved with the speed and precision that comes from years of training together. They had been taught to stay calm under pressure and to work as a team no matter what situation they faced. This was not a battlefield in a foreign country, but the principles were the same: protect the innocent and stop the bad guys. Lieutenant Rodriguez was already on his phone talking to their commanding officer at the naval base. "Sir, we have civilians attacking an elderly Purple Heart recipient," Rodriguez reported. "We need backup and possibly medical assistance." Within minutes, word was spreading through the military network about what was happening on Maple Street. Commander Mitchell looked at his team with determination in his eyes. "Gentlemen, we have a job to do," he said. "That man served his country with honor, and now it's our turn to serve him. These bullies think they can attack a veteran and walk away laughing. They're about to learn that there are consequences for their actions." The 4 SEALs got out of their vehicle and began walking toward the scene where people were helping Samuel get back on his feet. The bullies were still standing on the sidewalk, congratulating each other on their cruel joke and looking around for their next victim. Derek, Rick, and Joe had no idea that they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They thought they were tough guys who could push around anyone they wanted. They had no idea that some of America's most elite warriors had witnessed their cowardly attack and were now coming for them. As more people gathered to help Samuel, the 3 bullies decided to leave the scene before the police arrived. They started walking away slowly, still laughing about what they had done. They thought they had gotten away with their crime, and that there would be no consequences for hurting an innocent old man. But Commander Mitchell and his team were following them from a distance like hunters tracking dangerous animals. The SEALs stayed back far enough that the bullies did not notice them, but close enough to see exactly where they were going. These elite warriors had tracked enemies through jungles and deserts, so following 3 amateur bullies through city streets was easy for them. The hunt had begun and the bullies had no idea what was coming for them. 20 minutes had passed since the 3 bullies had pushed Samuel Washington into the street. Derek, Rick, and Joe were now walking through Riverside Park, feeling very proud of themselves. They had found a bench under a big oak tree and were sitting there, still laughing about their cruel attack on the elderly veteran. Derek stretched his arms above his head and smiled with satisfaction. "Did you see the look on that old man's face when Rick threw his stick?" Derek said, slapping his knee. "I thought he was going to cry like a baby." The 3 bullies thought they were very funny and clever. Rick pulled out a cigarette and lit it with shaking hands, not from fear but from excitement. "Yeah, and when Joe pushed him into the street, I thought for sure a car was going to hit him," Rick said with a laugh. "Too bad it didn't happen. Would have been even funnier." These young men had no idea how evil their words sounded. Joe was the quietest of the 3, but he was just as mean as the others. "We should find another old person to mess with," Joe suggested. "Maybe someone even weaker than that guy with the medal." The 3 bullies started looking around the park for their next victim, like wolves searching for sheep. What they did not know was that their 20 minutes of cruel laughter were about to come to a very sudden and shocking end. While they had been walking to the park, Commander Mitchell and his team had been very busy. The Navy SEALs had not just been following the bullies, they had been calling for backup and organizing a plan. Lieutenant Rodriguez had contacted their base and explained the situation to their commanding officer. Within minutes, 8 more Navy SEALs had been dispatched to help their brothers in arms. These elite warriors took attacks on veterans very seriously, and word was spreading quickly through the military community about what had happened to Samuel. Commander Mitchell had also called the local police to report the assault, but he wanted to make sure the bullies understood the seriousness of their actions before the authorities arrived. Sometimes civilian justice was not enough to teach bullies proper respect for those who had served their country. The park was peaceful and quiet, with only a few joggers and dog walkers enjoying the morning sunshine. Birds were singing in the trees, and a gentle breeze was blowing through the grass. It was the kind of beautiful morning that should have been filled with happiness and peace, not the cruelty that Derek, Rick, and Joe had brought into the world. As the 3 bullies sat on their bench making plans for more attacks, they did not notice the shadows moving silently between the trees around them. 12 Navy SEALs had positioned themselves in a perfect circle around the bullies, just like they had been trained to do when surrounding enemy targets in combat zones. These were not ordinary soldiers. These were some of America's most elite warriors, men who had completed the hardest military training in the world. They could move through any environment without making a sound, appear and disappear like ghosts, and strike with deadly precision when necessary. Commander Mitchell was directly behind the bench where the bullies were sitting. To his left was Lieutenant Rodriguez, crouched behind a large bush. Petty Officer Chen had taken position behind a tree trunk 20 feet away, while Petty Officer Williams was hidden behind a playground structure. The 8 additional SEALs who had arrived as backup were spread out in a wider circle, making sure that no matter which direction the bullies tried to run, they would be caught. Each SEAL was in radio contact with the others, coordinating their movements with military precision. Derek was in the middle of telling another cruel joke about Samuel when he noticed something moving in his peripheral vision. He turned his head slightly and saw a man in military uniform standing behind a tree watching them. Derek blinked his eyes, thinking he might be seeing things, but the man was still there. "Hey guys," Derek said quietly to his friends. "I think someone is watching us." Rick and Joe looked around and began to see more figures in the shadows. These were not park visitors or joggers. These were serious-looking men in military uniforms, and they were all staring directly at the 3 bullies. Rick dropped his cigarette and stood up from the bench. "What the hell is going on?" he asked nervously. His voice was no longer confident and cruel like it had been 20 minutes earlier. Now he sounded worried and confused. Joe also stood up and looked around in growing panic. "There are guys everywhere," Joe whispered. "They're all around us." Indeed, everywhere the bullies looked, they could see more Navy SEALs emerging from their hiding places like spirits materializing from the air. Commander Mitchell decided it was time to reveal himself. He stepped out from behind the bench and walked around to face the three bullies directly. Mitchell was an impressive man, tall and strong, with the confident bearing that comes from years of military service and leadership. His uniform was perfectly pressed, and his insignia showed his high rank. "Gentlemen," Mitchell said in a calm but commanding voice, "please remain seated. We need to have a conversation." His tone was not threatening, but there was an authority in his voice that made it clear this was not a request. Derek tried to act tough, but his voice was shaking. "Who are you people?" Derek demanded. "You can't just surround us like this. We haven't done anything wrong." But even as he spoke these words, Derek knew they were lies. He remembered exactly what they had done to Samuel 20 minutes earlier. Lieutenant Rodriguez stepped forward from behind his bush. "We are United States Navy SEALs," Rodriguez announced clearly, "and we witnessed what you three did to that elderly veteran at the intersection 20 minutes ago." The bullies' faces went white with fear as they realized they had been caught. More SEALs continued to appear from different directions, each one moving with the silent precision of a trained warrior. Rick counted at least 10 men, maybe more, all wearing military uniforms and all looking very serious. These were not people to mess with. Petty Officer Chen emerged from behind his tree and spoke directly to Joe. "That man you pushed into traffic earned a Purple Heart defending this country," Chen said with controlled anger. "Do you know what that means?" Joe shook his head, too scared to speak. "It means he was wounded in combat while serving his nation," Petty Officer Williams explained as he joined the circle around the bullies. "It means he bled for your freedom, and you thought it would be funny to hurt him." The three bullies were now completely surrounded by 12 elite warriors who could have easily overpowered them in seconds if they had wanted to. But the SEALs did not need to use violence. Their presence alone was enough to make Derek, Rick, and Joe understand that they had made a terrible mistake. Commander Mitchell looked each bully in the eyes one by one. "That veteran you attacked is 90 years old," Mitchell said slowly. "He served 2 tours in Vietnam. He saved lives under enemy fire. He came home and worked hard for 40 years to build a good life. And you three thought it would be entertaining to push him into traffic." The bullies had gone from feeling like powerful predators to feeling like helpless prey in just a few moments. They were learning what it felt like to be surrounded and outnumbered, just like Samuel had felt when they had trapped him at the crosswalk. The silence in the park was heavy and frightening. Derek, Rick, and Joe stood frozen in the middle of 12 Navy SEALs, their earlier confidence completely gone. The morning sun that had seemed so bright and cheerful now felt harsh and exposing. The three bullies realized they were in more trouble than they had ever been in their entire lives. Commander Mitchell stepped closer to Derek, the leader of the bullies. Mitchell's eyes were cold and serious, like a judge about to deliver a sentence. "Do you understand what you have done?" Mitchell asked in a voice that was quiet but filled with authority. "You attacked a man who fought for your freedom before you were even born." Derek tried to speak, but only a small croaking sound came from his throat. His mouth was dry with fear, and his hands were shaking like leaves in the wind. All the cruel words he had spoken to Samuel 20 minutes earlier seemed to have disappeared from his vocabulary. Lieutenant Rodriguez moved to stand next to his commander. "That Purple Heart medal you made fun of," Rodriguez said slowly, "represents blood shed on foreign soil. It represents sacrifice that you three will never understand." Rodriguez's grandfather had also been a war veteran, and seeing Samuel attacked had brought back memories of stories his grandfather had told him about coming home from war. Rick, the muscular bully who had thrown Samuel's walking stick into traffic, was now trembling like a scared child. We didn't know," Rick stammered weakly. "We were just having some fun. We didn't mean any real harm." But his words sounded hollow and pathetic, even to himself. Petty Officer Chen shook his head with disgust. "Fun? Chen repeated. You call pushing a 90-year-old man into traffic fun? You call destroying his walking stick fun? You call using racist language against a war hero fun? Each question hit the bullies like a physical blow. Joe, the quietest of the three bullies, suddenly dropped to his knees on the grass. Tears started running down his face as the reality of what they had done finally hit him. Oh God, Joe whispered. We could have killed him. That old man could have been hit by a car and died because of what we did. Commander Mitchell nodded grimly. That's right. You could have committed murder today. Is that the kind of men you want to be? Is that the legacy you want to leave behind? Mitchell had seen real evil during his military service, and he knew the difference between soldiers who fought with honor and cowards who attacked the innocent. More police sirens could be heard in the distance, getting closer to the park. The SEALs had called the authorities, and justice was coming through official channels as well as military ones. But before the police arrived, these elite warriors wanted to make sure the bullies understood the full weight of their actions. Petty. Officer Williams pulled out his phone and showed the bullies a picture he had taken of Samuel's Purple Heart medal, lying dirty and scratched on the street pavement. This is what respect looks like when you three are finished with it, Williams said sadly. A hero's medal thrown in the dirt like garbage. Derek finally found his voice, but it was completely different from the loud, cruel voice he had used. Against Samuel, now he sounded small and ashamed. We're sorry, Derek said quietly. We didn't realize. But his apology sounded weak and meaningless after what they had done. Lieutenant Rodriguez stepped forward. Sorry isn't enough, Rodriguez said firmly. Sorry doesn't heal the bruises on that man's body. Sorry doesn't repair his broken walking stick. Sorry doesn't erase the fear and humiliation you caused him to feel. The police cars arrived at the park, and several officers got out and walked toward the group. Commander Mitchell turned to greet them and explained what had happened. The police officers listened carefully and took notes while looking at the three bullies with disgust and disappointment. While the police were getting the details, one of the younger SEALs received a phone call with an update about Samuel's condition. The elderly veteran had been taken to the hospital for a complete checkup, and the doctors had found only minor bruises and scrapes. Samuel was going to be okay physically, which was a great relief to everyone. But the emotional damage was harder to measure. Samuel had lived through decades of racism and discrimination, had served his country with honor, and had spent his final years trying to live peacefully in his neighborhood. The attack by these three young men had shattered his sense of safety and belonging. The police officers began placing handcuffs on Derek, Rick, and Joe. As the metal clicked around their wrists, the three bullies finally understood that their actions had real consequences. They were going to jail, and their names would be in the newspaper for everyone to see what kind of people they really were. Derek looked up at Commander Mitchell one last time before being led to the police car. What's going to happen to us? Derek asked weakly. Mitchell looked down at him without any sympathy or mercy in his eyes. You're going to face justice, Mitchell replied simply. You're going to learn that in America we protect our veterans, especially the elderly ones who can't protect themselves. And you're going to learn that there are consequences for cowardly behavior. As the police cars drove away with the three bullies inside, the Navy SEALs remained in the park for a few more minutes. They wanted to make sure the area was secure and to discuss what had happened. These elite warriors had seen combat in dangerous places around the world, but witnessing the attack on Samuel had affected them deeply. Commander Mitchell gathered his team together. Today we did what we swore to do when we became SEALs, Mitchell said proudly. We protected those who cannot protect themselves. We stood up for a brother who served before us. This is what honor looks like. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Samuel was sitting on an examination table while a doctor checked his injuries. The nurse who had helped him in the street was there too, holding his hand and making sure he felt safe. Samuel's torn jacket had been cleaned, and his Purple Heart medal had been polished until it shined like new. When Samuel heard that Navy SEALs had witnessed the attack and caught the bullies, tears came to his eyes. But these were not tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude and pride. "Those boys didn't have to help me," Samuel said softly. "But they did it anyway because we're all part of the same family." The story of what happened spread quickly through the military community and then to the local news stations. Soon, people across the country were hearing about how Navy SEALs had protected an elderly black veteran from racist bullies. Letters and emails started pouring in from grateful Americans who wanted to thank Samuel for his service and the SEALs for their protection. The three bullies were charged with assault, elder abuse, and hate crimes. They would spend time in jail and be required to complete community service at the local Veterans Center, where they would learn about the sacrifices made by people like Samuel Washington. A week later, Samuel received a special visitor at his home. Commander Mitchell came to check on him and to bring him a new walking stick, this one carved from oak wood by a military craftsman and engraved with Samuel's name and rank. The two veterans, separated by decades and different wars, sat on Samuel's porch and shared stories about service and sacrifice. "Thank you for what you did," Samuel said to Mitchell. "You boys gave an old man his dignity back." Mitchell shook Samuel's hand firmly and looked him in the eyes with deep respect. "No, sir," Mitchell replied. "Thank you for paving the way for all of us. Your service made our service possible." And in that moment, the circle of military brotherhood was complete, connecting one generation of warriors to the next, ensuring that honor and respect would always triumph over hatred and cruelty.